We have a duty of service to protect the citizens. We took an oath for that, so I don't think it's too risky at all, especially if you train every day and you're competent in your job.
Enchanted Sky Media.
From Los Angeles, this is Code 3, the Firefighters Podcast, hosted by award-winning journalist Scott Orr. Code 3 features interviews with leading members of the fire service, discussing firefighting strategy, tactics, and other topics you need to know more about. Now, here's Scott.
That's right, and I will not let Parkinson's stop me. Thank you for joining me again for another edition of Code 3. You are listening to the show for and about firefighters. Let's get started. In between the FDNY's 4- and 5-person engine crews and volunteer department rigs staffed by just 2, there are a lot of departments that put 3 in the seats for calls. You may think this is a problem if you're from an agency that has more personnel. 2 in, 2 out is a problem that you have to fudge on the solution or just ignore. The captain, if he's the first on scene IC, probably shouldn't be making entry with a firefighter carrying a line. And then there's the engineer, who really ought to be operating the pump panel. But if there are only 3 people on the rig, the engineer sometimes gets pressed into service doing other things. But this level of staffing is a reality for many agencies, and they work with it on a daily basis. If a 3-man crew is new to you, then you'll want to hear from today's guests. There's 2 of them. First up is Jeff Bryant Jr. He's a firefighter paramedic with the Aurora, Illinois Fire Department, a 3rd-generation firefighter who has served in the fire service since 2007. He's also a co-owner of Fire Factory LLC and part of FireNuggets Inc, a nonprofit organization that helps the department with training logistics. Jeff, welcome to Code 3.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Okay, so there are 2 scenarios here. There's the isolated engine where 3 people are all we're going to get for a while, and then there's the ones where the cavalry is right behind them. So let's start with the first. How do we prioritize the job when 3 is all we're going to have for a while?
Prioritizing the job when you only have 3 ultimately just has to be on what the fire service mission is all about with saving lives. So that means getting inside, occupying the interior space, and search, and perform rescues if needed. Also, by performing suppression quickly and efficiently and applying water in the best places possible.
Now, how risky is it to start search and rescue operations when there's only 1 man still outside?
So obviously that's a big problem that a lot of people see with OSHA and the two in, 2 out rule, everything like that. Most places that operate with 3, especially out here and a lot of other places that I've talked to, they usually have a battalion chief or an ambulance or some other type of vehicle going. So just because you have a battalion chief or district chief, whatever you call it in your area, doesn't mean that can't be listed as a 2 out. And then you could also utilize your EMS personnel also as a 2 out. So I don't ultimately think it's risky, especially when we have a duty of service to protect the citizens. We took an oath for that, so I don't think it's too risky at all, especially if you train every day and you're competent in your job.
I've got to say it'd be kind of tough to hear bystanders say there's somebody inside and have you say, well, I can't go in because, there's not enough people here.
Yeah, a lot of people actually have that in their policies, that if there's a known rescue, you can take that risk. That's actually in a lot of people's policies and procedures already.
What about the other scenario where the first in crew is going to be joined by another engine in a few minutes? What should the 3 people involved be doing in this situation?
If you got another crew coming right behind you, depending upon whether it's an engine company, truck company, squad company, whatever your district has, they really shouldn't do anything that that different. The first due company that arrives on scene, especially the first due engine, should just primarily be suppression and search. Getting inside, occupying the space, pushing back fire, smoke, heat, and searching for victims off that line. If you have a second crew coming behind you, excellent. Depending on what their job task is, whether it's an engine or a truck, they can help get a search going on the second floor or bring a second line in, or magnitude of things that could happen with that second company. But the first company should ultimately still have the same focus: search, and then suppression. So those should be the priorities.
You're talking about what we can do with what we have, and that's the most realistic way to handle it. But given the number of agencies that only have 3 men per crew, does that add up to a problem for you in the long run?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a problem. Search and suppression, it just need to be the primary goal, done efficiently and swiftly. NFPA 1710 itself, they even list off that four people is better. Obviously, more people is literally going to be better for any situation. The more people that you can throw at something, you can have a doorman, you could have somebody backing up the nozzle man, and essentially, especially with an engine company, if you have 4 men, you can actually allow your officer to be an officer. He doesn't have to just hump hose in and out of the building for the nozzle man. You can actually have a thermal imager and be an officer and guide that team and help look for fire, and also do more search as well.
The way this normally works, in my experience from what I've seen, is that the firefighter grabs the nozzle, the company officer backs him up, the engineer stays with the rig. What about the engineer? Can he stay with the rig and operate the pump panel, or does he have to sort of set it and go help them out with the interior attack?
So the engineer, it's kind of a really good addition. They are 100% and should be the busiest person on the fire ground the first 5 or 10 minutes that they're there. Obviously they have to charge the line, put the engine in pump, charge the line for the firemen, and then also make sure that it sets the right pressure. But if you only have one line pulled and you're only pumping one line, you should not have to stand there and just stare at the house that's on fire because you charged one line. There's multiple other things that you can do. If you have a water supply you can put on, you can grab that, or empty the 2 ladders that you probably have on your engine, empty those, throw them on the seaside, the side that the building construction is telling you that the bedrooms are at on the second floor. You can go around, force the rear door, do a live fire layout in that back door so you can see if there's anybody within so many feet of the point of egress. There's multiple things that the engineer could do. Being an active engineer is probably what makes or breaks a lot of engine companies.
If the engineer grabs a ladder, does he at that point go back to the rig, or should he go back to check on the panel, or should he continue to help the crew?
As long as the pressure is set on that pump, he shouldn't have a problem. The only problem he'll have, obviously, is if they run out of water. But yeah, I would throw both ladders that I have on that engine, and then do whatever you can to assist the crew. You can go down, manage utilities, and anything that you can do that needs to be done. As long as the pump pressure is set, you should be in an okay place.
Does your department use a 3-person crew?
Yes.
Have you ever worked with a 4 or 5 man crew in any other situations?
There's sometimes that we do have 4-person crews, but it's not very often.
So to you, this is the norm, then? This is how it is?
Yeah, I worked on a 3-person crew pretty much my entire career. When I was a Folly at first, obviously as a volunteer, you either get 1 or you get 20, so that one's hit or miss. The couple other jobs that I had, every single engine company was 3-person. So this is kind of what I'm used to.
And so then if you're used to making it work, do you ever sit back and think, we'd be more efficient with 4, or have you guys reached a level of efficiency that you're pleased with?
No, I definitely think in wish, our own companies had 4 crews, because if you are efficient with 3, then all you need to do is train and work on being efficient with 4. And you'll be even more efficient. Obviously, because one more person just makes everything better. That's a no-brainer.
Jeff Bryant, thanks for joining me today on Code 3.
All right, thanks, Scott.
Next, we'll hear from Scott Freitag. He's the chief of the Central Arizona Fire and Medical Authority. He's also the president of the Arizona Fire Chiefs Association. Scott Freitag, welcome back to Code 3.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Scott.
Your agency always runs 3-member units, and that's what you're used to. What disadvantages do you guys see with that?
That is correct. We run first and minimum staffing, and it's about critical tasking, and that's where 4-person staffing, the studies have shown, is far better than 3. If you show up on a vehicle crash, having that additional sets of hands, as you're well aware, if you're on the highway, there's significant risk to all first responders. So if you can put 3 people on the immediate incident and have someone else watching for safety, monitoring traffic, getting the cones out.
One of the situations that I know that you guys face is that when you respond to a structure fire, you have to send more units just so you'll have more people there.
That is correct. And in an area like where we live, the Prescott Basin, we have very limited resources just in general terms as far as fire response or any type of emergency response. And so there are significant limits to what we can and cannot do. We follow the 2-in, 2-out rule. So if you have 2 people inside, you have to have 2 people outside. But we also understand if there is an immediate threat to life and there is a chance that we can make a difference and affect a rescue, a person can go in and start to work. If everyone is out of the structure and it's just the structure on fire, so we're talking about content saved, not lives, then we tell our folks to follow the 2-in, 2-out rule.
So where do you stand on what you heard about the idea that if there are 3 people on the scene, the engineer does not need to stay with the rig? Does that work for you?
Not really. I mean, we do count the engineer as another person on the scene. So if you have, say, battalion chief and engineer, and then a firefighter and a company officer on the scene, that counts for 2-in, 2-out. Is that really effective? I would say it's marginally effective at best. I think the belief is that your second-in unit will arrive fast enough that 2-in, 2-out would be effective and only a short delay. But that is really location dependent.
Now, NFPA, of course, asks that we have 4 people on a rig. You don't have that. Do the people not realize the risk that they take by not paying for full staffing on a rig?
We're very densely populated in Prescott Valley and Prescott, but there's a lot of rural areas around us and not a lot of other resources. So it becomes challenging. So I've spoken with agencies that have a person minimum staffing, and some of the challenges with that is you generally only have 4 seats in the fire engine. So if somebody calls out sick, you don't necessarily have an extra person just hanging around waiting to jump into that seat, which means overtime, and sometimes that means mandatory overtime. And it becomes a challenge when you have to regularly mandate that somebody stays and works because you have to maintain that 4-person staffing. So from the standpoint of critical tasking and safety, 4 persons is better. From a logistical standpoint and a financial standpoint, it can be a bit of a challenge.
So how much of a risk does it actually pose to have 3-person units instead of 4?
In my experience, I'm not going to say that it poses a significant risk. What it does is require you to bring more equipment to the scene than would otherwise be needed. Now, can there be a danger to that? Well, an argument can be made that any time you have an apparatus respond code 3 to the scene of an incident, there is a risk, an inherent risk with that unit running code 3. So the more of those units you have on the road, the more risk there is during the response portion of the incident. So I think it's a bit of a stretch, but certainly one could argue that there is some level of additional risk by, just on the response portion.
Right, but don't studies show that firefighters tend to be worn out much faster when there are 3 than 4, and even when there are 4 than 5?
They do, absolutely. And that would be another risk of having 3 as opposed to 4 in our area, again, with limited access to resources that we have. Rather than going through 1 or 2 bottles and then going to rehab, sometimes our folks have to go through 3 or 4 bottles before they get to rehab, just because we don't have enough people to get the critical task done. And that does create a safety issue for your personnel, from cardiac issues to additional injuries.
All right, Scott Freitag, thanks very much for your time.
Absolutely, Scott. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, there you go. What did you think of Jeff and Scott's opinions? You can leave your comments on our website at code3podcast.com/trio. There's a link to more information there as well, so check it out. And don't forget, you can support this podcast in a couple of ways. You can buy a t-shirt or other apparel with the Code 3 logo, which I think is pretty cool. Or you can join the people who become patrons of Code 3, and if you make a pledge of $10 a month or more, you'll get extra content that other people don't get to hear. It's easy. Head over to code3podcast.com, look at the right sidebar, and you'll see big old buttons. One for the Code 3 store, one to become a patron. Click on the appropriate button and you can join the people who are supporting the podcast that supports firefighters. All right, that's it. That's all for this edition of Code 3. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next time with more, and I hope you'll join me. I'm Scott Orr, and until then, stay safe.
Code 3 is a production of Enchanted Sky Media. To contact us, get more information on today's topic, or to subscribe to the podcast, go to code3podcast.com.